Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Monster Monday. I am your horrible host, Graham Nolan. Today, we're going to talk about Jim Warren and the Warren magazines of the 1960s, 70s, and they pretty much ended by the early 1980s. Jim Warren had some of the greatest artists ever working for his comics, and I think some of the lure of that was the fact that they weren't hampered by the Comics Code Authority. So, who is Jim Warren and how did he get going on this? In the 1950s, Jim Warren was working in advertising as a writer and artist, and he was inspired by Hugh Hefner's Playboy magazine. And he decided to launch his own adult magazine. The result was After Hours, which lasted a whopping 4 issues and led to his arrest on obscenity charges. According to Jim, a lot of publishers said, look at the money, look at those Playboy sales, let's put out an imitation. And by that time, 35 Playboy imitations came out, and Jim Warren's was one of them. It was called After Hours, and he says, I got my first experience with national magazine distributors and retailers and with large magazine printing plants. It lasted 4 issues. It was awful. I learned the hard way about Teamsters, truckers, loading docks, slowdowns at printing plants, and bankers who welch on you. Welcome to the world of magazine publication. What came out of After Hours and this learning curve, which I find very interesting because, whenever we go into different things like the way I'm doing crowdfunding and stuff like that, there's always a learning curve as you start to learn the various nuances of every business. And sometimes you learn the hard way. Usually you learn the hard way. So through After Hours, Warren met a Hollywood literary agent by the name of Forrest J. Ackerman. Everybody knows him now as Uncle Forry. And he had an idea for a horror movie-themed magazine that would spoof monsters but treat them like they were the heroes. This was a great idea because, as we talked about in some of the other streams, Screen Gems had released the Universal Monster packages to televisions, and this young generation of baby boomers was now being exposed and eating up and loving these horror movies. And baby boomer dollars were just as good as adult dollars. And there was a lot more of them. So that's what they went after. They decided to put this magazine together, and it resulted in a one-shot called The Famous Monsters of Filmland, which sold out its 200,000 print run in a matter of days and became a Bible for monster kids all over the country. Warren, because After Hours obviously was a flop, he financed the first issue, and the Upstate printer wanted payment up front for it. But he got some advance money from his distributor called Cable News, but he was still $9,000 short. So according to Jim, he says, I walked into a bank in Philadelphia to plead for a loan. I said, I'm not going to tell you anything about the magazine, but I need this loan. The banker said, for collateral, you'll pledge your printing presses and your equipment. We require that as collateral against the loan. I said, my entire equipment list consists of a typewriter, 2 yellow pads, a drawing board, and me. I have a distributor, an idea for a magazine, and I have a printer, and I need $9,000. I told him I wasn't going to leave the bank without the money. Must have sounded we could have got the loan. The printer got his money up front. The magazines were shipped. The newsstands sold out. And Warren Publishing Company was born. It's a great story. It's probably most of it is true. Maybe a little embellishment there. But we're all want to do that. And there it is. The one that launched it all, Famous Monsters of Filmland. Not a great cover. It almost seems like they're going for the Playboy of monsters. with the sex appeal of the girl here. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is Jim Warren wearing a mask, a Halloween mask. I could be wrong on that, but I thought I remember reading that at one time. Maybe somebody in the chat knows. Where was I? Get so many screens open. So obviously this was a huge hit, and it launched Jim Warren's career in publishing. By 1964, he launched a book called Creepy. After introducing what he called monster comics in Monster World, which was another magazine of his, Warren expanded in 1964 with horror comic stories in two sister magazines, Creepy and Eerie. Now, Creepy started in 1964, and Eerie followed 2 years later in 1966. There were black and white publications in a standard magazine format rather than comic book size. They sold for 35 cents as opposed to the standard 12 cents at the time for a comic book. And because of the format, they averted the restrictions of the Comics Code Authority. According to Warren, the Comics Code saved the industry from turmoil, but at the same time, it had a cleansing effect on comics, making them clean, proper, and family-oriented. We would overcome this by saying to the Comic Code Authority, the industry, the printers, and the distributors, we are not a comic book, we're a magazine. Creepy is a magazine sized and will be sold on magazine racks, not comic book racks. Creepy's manifesto was brief and direct. First, it was to be a magazine format, 8.5 by 11, going to an older audience not subject to the Comics Code Authority. So they were definitely going after a very different audience. Those baby boomers were now becoming teenagers, and they were looking for something more. And there's another shot of Famous Monsters of Filmland, because I want to talk about Basil Gogos and the artists that worked for Warren Magazine. But before I do that, here's the first issue of Creepy Magazine. It sports a beautiful Jack Davis cover. Of course, Jack Davis got his start at EC Comics, and EC was the precursor to Creepy and Eerie, and definitely was an inspiration to this brand of comics. Whereas the EC was a strict comic book size, and ironically led to the Comics Code Authority because of the type of stories that they were doing. So now we have the inspiration, Creepy and Eerie, coming along, and they're going to circumvent the Comics Code, which was born out of the type of stories that they're going to do here. There's an irony there, which I love. And I love that stick-to-itiveness and American ingenuity. You know what? If they're going to tell me I can't do something, I'm going to figure a way around it. And these guys did. The beauty about these early Creepy magazines and Eerie magazines is that they really introduced the world to the paintings of Frank Rosetta. Now, Frank had been around quite a while. He had worked briefly for EC, Fiction House, and he also ghosted Al Cap on his famous comic strip. But I think this is the first time we got to see his paintings, and the legend was born. The first like 6 or 8 issues of Creepy had Frank Frazetta covers, which were obviously incredibly influential and amazing. This one's so powerful. I mean, you've never seen a werewolf look like that before. Like it could just, bench press, 8,000 pounds. And the length of those claws compared to this guy. Fantastic stuff. Another very scary looking, eerie Frank Frazetta cover. I remember seeing this as a poster. A lot of these eerie and creepies were made into posters, and you'd see them in the back of Famous Monsters magazines, Creepy and Eerie, as well as the Monster Times. One of the offshoots of Jim's company was, or rather his publishing line was Captain Company, which became a marketplace for monster back issues, masks, books, all that kind of stuff. And it continued on even after Famous Monsters was eventually, discontinued and sold. But the thing about these magazines is that the artists, I mean, we mentioned Basil Gogos and Frank Frazetta, but this is a who's who of legends. Neil Adams, Gene Colan, Frank Frazetta, Angelo Torres, Roy Krenkel, Gray Morrow, Al Williamson, Johnny Craig, Reed Crandall, Alex Toth, John Severin, Russ Heath, Wally Wood. All of these guys worked on these magazines. Then there was a new generation that came in. Dan Adkins, Frank Brunner, Richard Buckler, Dave Cockrum, Richard Corbin, Ken Kelly, Pepe Moreno, Mike Royer, Tom Sutton, and a guy named Bernie Wrightson. As far as, that's a who's who of American, comic book illustrators of the day. And then you had the Spanish artists that came in, Jose Gonzalez, Luis Bermejo, Jose Ortiz, Esteban Maroto, Vincent Alcazar. Let's see, who else? Oh, and then the Filipinos came in, Alex Nino, Rudy Nebres, Alfredo Alcala, Pablos Marcos, Gonzalo Mayo. I mean, the list goes on and on. You had covers by Jack Davis, H.R. Geiger, mentioned Basil Gogos, San Julian, Boris Vallejo, Enrique Torres. And then let's not forget the writers who worked on these things. Archie Goodwin, one of the greatest of all time, Bruce Jones, Don McGregor, Steve Skates, just to name a few. Creepy number 3 also has the first known interracial kiss in a story called The Men Who Called Him Monster. And it was written by Don McGregor and drawn by Luis Garcia. And it's kind of funny that this thing came out because that was in 1972, which seems kind of odd that it'd be that late. But, because Star Trek had the first televised interracial kiss in 1969. But at any rate, McGregor says that the kiss was actually due to the artist misunderstanding the line, "This is the clincher," in the script. He must have thought this is the clincher means, two people kissing, which is pretty funny. But the Warren magazines, they lasted till about 1982 or so, when Jim Warren filed for bankruptcy. I think it was bought out by Harris Comics at one point, and then Dark Horse took over publishing reprints. These things are relatively inexpensive, I think. I haven't checked the back issue market on them, but they're really great collections of stories and art. And if you're into that stuff, if you're a budding horror artist or comic book artist, it pays to pick up these issues because they're in black and white. They're easy to, discern and deconstruct the artwork on. Just great stuff. So let's say good morning. Norrin is here. Good morning. Dr. Mask's Retro Elixir is here. He has a day off. Hail Monster Monday, got locally roasted coffee and the day off. This is a great start. That is a good start to have a Monday off. Excellent. Good for you, sir. JP Roca asked, what's good? Eerie and Creepy's good. Revan Saber says, good morning, all. Comic Talk with Pops Van Zant says, hey, yo. Dr. Mask woke up super early because he must have been excited for this show. Man of War 665, neighbor of the beast, says, hail, amigos. Dr. Mask says, when I was a kid, my mom picked up a box of horror magazines at a garage sale for me. After she flipped through a few, she gave them to a neighbor because they weren't for kids. Oh, bummer. I'll tell you another magazine story, which is kind of funny. When I was a kid, I don't know, I was probably 10 or 11. And my neighbor across the street, we were living on Long Island. And my neighbor was moving, so he was clearing out his place. And he had a bunch of Playboys that he dumped into the garbage can. And all the boys in the neighborhood found out about it. And we raided the garbage can. We're looking through the Playboys. And my mom, God bless her, was a teacher. And, she wanted to, spare our eyes from those airbrush beauties. So she comes across the street and says, hey, boys, why don't you come on over to the house, and I'll let you look at the National Geographics, because, that was the one national magazine where you could have topless women in it, because they were from African tribes and, other cultures. And even at 10 years old, we knew that wasn't the same. It's looking at these things. Needless to say, all the boys were like, nah, that's okay, Mrs. Nolan. We're good here. But my mom was the same way with to dovetail on Dr. Mask's comment. I had my mom pick up Savage Sword of Conan for me one time. I was sick and I wanted something to read. And I think it was either Savage Sword of Conan or it was the giant size Conan, those treasury editions. But I think there was some nudity in it, like a topless girl. So my mom was leery about bringing that one home, but she eventually gave in and she got it for me. But whichever one it was, it's a great book. It was either Savage Sword of Conan #2 or it was the giant size treasury. Pop Culture Avenger is here. He says, good morning, Rob Fellows. Hail Graham, morning, Monster Mag kids. James Allen is here. Amen. And boobs. Skull Nasher, what is a Latin quarter girl? Was that on one of the covers? Let me see. A Night with a Latin Quarter Girl. Oh, okay. I do believe that was a polite way of saying a hooker. The Normie Nerd is here. Hyper Kaiju. JP Roca says, very interesting, learning a lot. Good. Creepy said, Comics Code, go F yourself. Todd Habashad is here. Habashad, good morning, Graham. The Warren magazines are the best. I feel when they stopped making the magazines and they started to publish, Vampirella into color, if I feel they ruined it in a way. Yeah, I forgot to mention Vampirella. Vampirella was another one of their successful magazines that came on the scene in 1969. Vampy started off as a horror host, the same way Uncle Creepy and Cousin Eerie was. And then Archie Goodwin came on board and gave a backstory to created the actual character of Vampirella, and then the stories revolved around her. Those magazines were outstanding, with Pepe Gonzalez doing the artwork from Spain. Just gorgeous, gorgeous art. And Archie Goodwin, of course, one of the greatest comic writers to ever work in the business. Just fun and interesting stories. Love those issues. Ah, thank you, Todd. It was not Jim Warren. It was Forrest J. Ackerman in The Monster Mask. Okay. I knew it was one of those guys. Thank you for clearing that up for me. For us, I should say. Yeah, the Famous Monsters covers were some of the best. Wish I had more that survived, particularly when Basil Gogos did them. His use of color was amazing. I got to meet him at a little monster. It was called Monster Bash. They do it in Butler, PA, every year, and we went there back in the early 2000s, I think. And Basil was there, and I got to talk to him and see some of his artwork and posters. Just amazing, amazing work. Really nice man too. Yeah, Richard Corbin. I think I mentioned him in that list of artists. Hybrid Kaiju. I've been steadily buying an issue of Famous Monsters on eBay every month for the last few years, starting to get a nice little collection. Nice. North Free is here. He says good morning to Graham and the Monster Chat. Good morning. I think that's the beauty of horror. It can be anytime, anywhere, limited to only your imagination. No, absolutely. Horror exists in the minds of humanity, so we can tell those tales anywhere and in any time. The things that scare us. Steve Scott picked up a bunch of these in Belgium. Cool. Saint Ravage is here. Says good morning, all. Hail, Graham. Hail to the chat. Rob Fellows says Famous Monsters was hard to get hold of in the UK. If you did see it, it was on the top shelf with the adult mags. Really, Famous Monsters was a top shelf mag. That's interesting. Of course, Britain is very seemed very persnickety about horror. It was the ban in Britain of horror movies, which led to Universal stopping making them in the mid 1930s. When they finally restarted it in 1939 with Son of Frankenstein, but there was a period there because of the British ban that they stopped making those movies. So, but then by the same token, by the 1950s, it was Hammer horror films that kind of reignited it again. So it's weird that they would put those with the adult mags. When I lived in LA, Bill Dubay taught a creative writing for comics course at UCLA. Great fun discussing monster stories and the Rook for Erie. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, Bill Dubay was one of the editors. Warren Magazine was sort of tumultuous in the turnover of editors that it went through, and Bill Dubay was one of them, and also one of the main writers too. Very talented. I believe after he left, it was Louise Jones. Wheezy took over, and she brought in um, a lot of the American artists. After there was a period there where the American artists were what was running uh, the magazines, and then they brought in the Spanish and the Filipinos, and then Louise Jones brought back a bunch of the Americans. I forget what the reason was that a lot of the Americans left. I don't know if it was an issue with Warren himself, money, or what the deal was. But another guy we should mention too that work of his career was Steve Ditko. When he got to work in black and white with the washes, some of Ditko's work was absolutely amazing in these books. Well, Statistical Zero is here. Good morning, Stat. Empyrean Vole, he lived on Long Island in the 70s. Valley Stream. Ah, that wasn't too far from where I lived. I lived in Long Beach. We moved in 74. My dad was a homicide detective, and it was getting a little dicey in New York and on the island at that point. And so he moved us to Florida. We traded one beach for another. Dr. Mass says there's a hardcover collection of the Ditko creepy, amazing stuff, and it has some behind-the-scenes stuff. Ditko experimented a lot during that run. Yeah, I think Ditko enjoyed some creative freedoms there that he wasn't getting understand. Larry Romano is here. Good morning. Savage Sort of Conan. The reason Graham Nolan is a sexual deviant now. Okay, I'm going to deny that charge vociferously. I like the black and white comics. It seemed like the grown-up comics at the time. Well, yeah, it wasn't just that they were black and white. It was the subject matter. Joe Ketterer says, good morning, all. Crease 1984 pops in, here on duty, but have nothing to add to the conversation, so I'm just listening. Thanks, Graham in chat. Thanks for listening, Crease 1984. Steve Scott says, thanks for these great podcasts. Graham makes for some great entertainment while spending the long hours at the board. You're welcome, Steve, and thanks for tuning in. It's the amazing thing about this whole stuff is that we get to share the things we love, you know. I really enjoy that. You can still subscribe to Famous Monsters. True. It's just not the same. They cover a lot of modern stuff, whereas, you know, the other ones was all the classics. I did not mention Gray Morrow, and how rude of me, Pop Culture Avenger. Gray Morrow, actually, the first cover of Creepy that was not, well, the first cover, of course, we showed was Jack Davis. And then the next batch of covers were all Frank Rosetta. So the first cover after Frank was done by Gray Morrow. Gray also did interior work, just amazing stuff. I got to know Gray when I was first breaking into the business. He was part of a group that used to go out to a pub on Thursdays after hours. Like I would go in every Thursday, show my portfolio, and then go out with these guys, guys like Dick Giordano, Gray Morrow, or Ernie Colon, Sal Amendola, and then there's a bunch of other guys that would come in and out. And Nick Cuddy. Nick Cuddy also used to work here for Warren. And we'd go out for pints of beer and stuff. And I'd listen to him, and Gray was lamenting he wasn't getting a lot of work at the time from DC and stuff. And, you know, the read on him was his work wasn't dynamic enough, you know, for the day. And it's ironic, though, because when you look at Gray Morrow's stuff in his heyday, like this stuff here, you know, it's very photo referenced in places as well. Only a little bit more dynamic than some of the photo reference stuff you see today. So I've always contended that if Gray Morrow was around today, he'd be a superstar. His work would be just eaten up by the editors, and he'd have more work than he knew what to do with. But it's sort of sad that it was just bad timing. Christopher Juliano is here. Good morning. All right, gang. I think I've covered all the comments here. All right, so next Monday, we're gonna discuss Boris Karloff and the 3 Frankenstein films he made. He only made 3 where he played the monster. Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. So we're going to kind of dissect those 3, and I'm probably going to piss some people off when I put them in order of how much I like them. So you have a little homework this week. You gotta catch those 3, and so that you're boned up on what we'll be talking about. Tonight, I suspect the Comicsgate Kings will be on with our usual band of nonsense. Wednesday is, of course, the Storytellers. I'm still working on a guest for that, so I'll announce that when that happens. Thursday is the Professionals, of course, and it's on my channel. It'll be right here. So make sure you guys tune in for that. If you are a fan of Alien Alamo and have backed it, I thank you very much. If you haven't, the link is in the description of this show. Please go hit that. The book is at the printers. It is being printed now. I promised a year ago, or almost a year ago, when we launched the campaign, that it would fulfill in December, and here we are in December, and it will fulfill. I'm getting together all the other stuff that goes along with fulfillment, but the books themselves, the important stuff, is at the printer, and should be delivered the week of December 20th, I believe is what they told me. So once those books start coming in, I'll be taking pictures of that, and I hope you'll consider backing it. And again, thanks for tuning in here. Please hit that like button for when you watch these shows, or even if you watch it in not live. Hit the like button. It helps the algorithms, and subscribe to the channel. Again, that helps monetize it as well. So I thank you, my friends. We shall see you tonight on the Comicsgate Kings. Have a great day.